Hello, everyone. We're doing this where we've got this little headshot up for the first time, so I hope that technology is working for you. Thank you to all of you for gathering together today and also for sharing your self-care. I know that in many ways, for those of you that are doing teaching online, in some ways it's more demanding than ever and has some unique kinds of stresses. And so I appreciate you thinking about how am I taking care of myself, whether it's directly doing things that are about that or doing those other things that help me just be who I want to be, connecting with loved ones and thinking about doing those kinds of things. So I'm here reading your comments, and some of you are talking about what you're going to do right after this session. And congratulations for that. So let me see if I can help facilitate a really useful hour and a half. One of the things I've discovered since the world's kind of gone crazy is that when work is satisfying, I feel better as a result. Not that I don't still need to go out into my garden, but let's see if we can um, do some good work together. So I want to start just by telling you a little bit about myself and about my thoughts and feelings about this topic. Um, Jonathan Fribley, I'm a former early childhood educator, now I do professional development and facilitation with early childhood educators really around the country. I've had the opportunity to do a fair amount of work with folks in Illinois, although I myself am in Minnesota. I'm delighted to be here with you. Like many of you, my work has, sort of been turned upside down in the last little while. Um, Back last spring, suddenly I wasn't with children at all anymore. And now I work with a variety of sites, and some of those are entirely online, and others are doing hybrid kinds of models. And a few childcare sites are with children. So, like you, I'm exploring this new world of figuring out how to make online work. Um, with regard to our topic of books, I think probably like you, I want to claim some expertise in that, right? We've been reading books with kids for a long time, and we know some things that work, and we know some ways of bringing children into books and having them get a lot out of those stories so that they're powerful. However, I'm not an IT expert, and it's amazing how little I knew and in fact, I think in some ways the field knew about what kinds of interactions really work online with young kids before March. So what I'm hoping today is to share with you some of what I've seen educators do, some of what I've had an opportunity to do online, some of what the research says, but also really to listen to you folks. And I actually have a little note next to me here on my desk that says listen. So I want to invite lots of your experiences and wisdom. I'm already talking a little too much right now on that, but just being aware of that. Um, so let's remember before we go into those specifics to do our thank yous to all of you, especially for sort of serving children. Everyone who makes it possible for you to be here. That is, of course, everybody from the people at the grocery store to perhaps your dog right now who would normally expect a walk at this time or may decide that she or he wants to climb up in your lap in the middle of this. And along with that, then I want to just invite everybody here to take care of your needs. You are human beings. Please take care of your humanness as you need to, right? And especially thanks to Karen and everybody in Illinois at the center who has made this possible. When I mention your dog and all the rest of that, I want to also acknowledge, I use this term static sometimes, the idea that there are sort of things going on around us that make it really hard for us to show up the way we want to show up and be the person we want to be and interact in the ways we want to. Some of those things, of course, we've been sitting with for months around coronavirus. And some of those things are about online technology. And, I'll just, flat up describe sort of how that works for me. I've spent more time online in the last 6 months than I had in the previous 6 years in all kinds of formats. And yet here we are in using Adobe Connect, and it's a format I use very little. Okay, I'm usually on Zoom or some other things like that. And so, when we have those experiences, or simply when we try to sit somewhere in our house and facilitate activities with young kids while the dog wants to go out, or I was just on a session. I have no doubt some of you have had this experience where um, a teacher was doing an amazing job leading a lesson, and she took the kids off mute, said they could share some comments, and it was really clear there was something going on in one home that was probably not the greatest. Well, wasn't okay to be shared widely, and so you've just got all kinds of things to juggle. So we've got what I would call static. And in the context of that, I want to just invite us right now for our work today to just take a moment and notice who you are, how you are, what's going on inside you. Let go of anything that you need to let go of so that you can be here. And just breathe and be present, right? I would also say that when we think about our storybook reading, and I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this, but I want to just remind you of it now, is that how we show up to that story is in fact one of the things that determines how it goes. And so I want to give you permission to relax and say to yourself, I got this. And even when the Zoom connection gets jittery or whatever, to just take a breath and go, doing the best I can, and I'm going to make it work the best I can, and I'm not going to sweat it beyond that. Personal story, I was recently leading a conference, a Zoom conference between a bunch of teachers. I was facilitating it, and my connection actually dropped out, not once, not twice, 10 times. And what I discovered in the process of that was, all I can do is not dump that stress on everybody else and handle it the best I can. So I want to just give you permission to do your best, and your best is not perfect, and to go. There is no such thing as failure, only practice. Right? So there we go. Being present. Uh, let's think a little bit uh, about what happens during these interactions, and I want you to think about some time that you've had with. Oh, you know what? I'm just realizing I don't think you folks have my face. Let me see if this works better. Do you have my face now? Hopefully you do. See, there we go, technology glitch. First time I've ever used the little camera there. And I just noticed, oh, look at that. It says start sharing. So anyway, let's let go of that and come back to our connect here. I think it's useful for us to have a little bit of a sense of each other and a little bit of awareness of what's going on for each other. And so what I want to invite you to do is to share, each person to share something in, Karen is going to put up a poll in just a second. And I think what I'd like to invite you to share is this. I want you to think about a moment when you've had online interactions with children and families. And I want to invite you to share with just something that's brought you pleasure, or maybe even delight or joy. Some moment with a child or a family or an adult. And oh, Karen's going to put it just right down in the chat box rather than up in a separate poll. Okay, so if you just share something in the chat box where you've experienced some pleasure during an online interaction, that can sort of help us situate. Okay, and I will share one as well. Sylvia is sharing. A student said, "I'll miss you, teacher," before she hung up. Uh, Oh, Nicole had a student say, "I love you." I saw that this morning too. Oh, that's great. Okay. Enjoyed seeing children at home. Yeah. Yeah, Christina, I really appreciate that sense of how it can be a distraction, but there's also insight and joy that goes with that. We may want to think about that some as far as story reads too. Beverly shares that she was watching one of her parents work with their child and saw the joy of seeing them both work together. That's something we don't get to see otherwise, is it? So, and Alexandra mentions the family connection as well, and Heidi as well. And so let's try to keep that alive and remember that as we do thinking today. There are things going on with families that we've never been able to see or support before. Yeah, Tracy, I appreciate that that missing having them in your classroom, and so this is our connect, isn't it? And we get let's sort of remember that we get satisfaction out of that too. And what I sort of want to keep in mind as we have our conversation here, that relationships have always been central to working with young children, and that has not changed. And that's perhaps true now more than ever. It's harder in some ways. I don't need to tell you that, but kids have fewer easy connections now. So when we show up in their living room or their bedroom or wherever we show up, right, that matters in some ways that it hasn't maybe quite as much before. And I'll mention this now and try to drop it in some other times. The research on effective online learning shows that much more important with young kids than any particular bells and whistles and fades or flashes or zooms or whatever is the children perceiving that they have a relationship with the person who is interacting with them. And when that they have that relationship, they show up not because they're going, "Oh, my teacher really knows how to help me listen to, to beginning sounds," right? But they show up because of you, and they stay connected to the activity in no small part because you're leading it. So yeah, relationships are everything, and they still are. So we're going to be thinking about that some as we look at storybook reads too, and the kinds of things we do for those relationships, such as using the camera and the ways we use it. All right. So um, I don't know here if anybody's ever thought of themselves as Dolly Parton before um, the last few months, but we are suddenly doing things that there's been sort of a bunch of people doing before us, but maybe we haven't paid that much attention. There have been children's storybook reads up online for, probably about as long as there's been fast internet connections, right? Dolly Parton has not only had her imagination library, but she's been reading to kids online. Oprah's been reading to kids online. I don't know if some of you, I mean, there's all kinds of folks. The one who I didn't know, who I just started seeing, was Michelle Obama, all sorts of folks. And of course, they hire the best consultants, they have the best camera crews, they have whatever technology they need. Someone's probably taking care of their dog for them while they're reading, all of those kinds of things. So we're reading children's books, and we don't have the resources they have, and yet we face the same fundamental challenge. Kids stay engaged when we are reading in this sort of new format. So we're going to think together. We're about, this really fundamental question: what do we need to do to keep kids engaged in a story read? I would venture that you're pondering exactly the same thing. What do I keep kids? How do I keep kids engaged at other times? And so we will uh, be be sort of referring to some issues that are not unique to story reads, but there are probably some special both challenges and opportunities. So here are, one of the things I actually, this is not the first time I've had this kind of discussion around this issue. And I've been asking teachers, so, what kinds of challenges do you face? What are you bumping up against in reading with kids online? And here are some of the comments that some teachers have shared. And as I share these, if you have reflections on your own about what's going on with reading with kids online, I would invite you to share in the chat box, any particular issues, challenges, questions. You all showed up at this session. I assume that's at least in part because you're, still trying to figure some stuff out. And so, what are you facing? One of the teachers, more than one, a number of teachers have talked with me about sort of the challenges of checking for understanding. It's hard to see the eye contact. If you have if you're using Zoom, for example, and you have everybody on gallery view, how do you scan all those kids? If you just have the book up, you don't see any of the kids. Okay, and so the next comment, not being able to see their reactions, the issues with hearing their answers, because do I take everybody off Zoom? How do I do that? There are challenges with exactly how am I going to show those illustrations, right? And then that one of distractions that are out of your control, right? And I don't need to name all of those. Kids and parents aren't responding, unsure if the child's truly engaged, and Laura shares some similar kinds of things. I think Nicole mentions the wait time when students are unmuting. Nicole also mentions parents, sort of the kinds of ways parents give them assistance. And, on the one hand, great, it's great to have parents there assisting. When the parents sort of give the answer to the child, then, what goes on with that. That really, I see this one over and over. I've experienced it too. If I'm trying to invite one child in, Nicole mentions, not losing the engagement of the other students, right? So one child's off Zoom, and maybe you even, put them on Spotlight, and they're filling the screen, and so, what's going on with the other kids? And then, yeah, let's see. It isn't the same as reading in person. Yeah, it's so much harder to tell if they're really connected with the book. The feedback. So some themes here about the role of parents, how we do the reading, the kinds of the cues that we're used to getting from kids about whether they're with us or not, the ways that we keep them engaged by inviting them to comment. And then this really unique one of how we involve parents. So sounds like some folks are having some, that these are the challenges, right? So what I'd like to do with you is sort of come at this a couple different ways. One is I do want to remind us that some of the sort of foundational strategies for powerful book readings still apply here. Okay, some of the things that we do around sort of voices and comprehension and some of those kinds of things, and we'll get into all the details. I do want to take time to, essentially remind us of best practice because that's powerful, and then also be thinking some about what do we know from sort of the pros that have been doing this and the research. And what are some of the ways that others of you are sharing that we can use as resources on this. All right. So the things that have always been good practice, and then what are we learning in the process of being online together and from the research and the pros is kind of where we're going to go. So the first question I want to just check in on. I'm guessing this is resolved, but I want to check. I know. Last spring when I was having conversations, the first issue for people was simply access to books because, of course, we went to their sites. And so maybe you could just give me a Y or an N in the chat box. A Y, yes, I'm still, let's see, how do I want to phrase this? Let me make sure I get this right. Let's do it this way. Yes, I have access to books, not an issue at all anymore, give me a Y, or no, access to books is still a problem for me. So let me just check and see where people are. Okay. I'm seeing people are mostly, not everybody, okay? Um, but, there are some N's, mostly yeses. So, um, so let's just take this quickly for the people that are having some challenges. It looks like Sarah's got, yeah, okay. Let's just sort of remember sort of what the options are. Um, if you can break into your site, get into your site, of course. We know what the issues are there. The public libraries are now starting to, depending on where you are, they're either reopening or providing curbside. A cheap way of getting access to books is to buy used titles from Abe Books. Jessica mentions the challenge with Spanish books. And so what I want to make sure we mention on that is that, like, the one technology that seems to be widely available for getting books for people is Epic. Tracy mentions also teaching strategies and YouTube. And so there, if you can't physically get a book in your hand, and we're going to sort of do a number of sort of thinking about how to share books, assuming we have physical books in our hands. But we've had mentioned for at least 3 sources of books online. Tracy, is it correct that teaching strategies is actually providing books online? I think that's right, but I want to make sure that's true. In addition, of course, YouTube does. And if you're not familiar with Epic, last I knew, there were still essentially free teacher accounts with Epic, and that was letting people have access to books 2 ways. One, over on the right-hand side, let me get my little pointer here. All right. So over here, there were, in essence, read to me. They call them read to me books, and in read. Well, actually, let me start it this way. With the video books, I think I have this right. With the video books, essentially a kid presses play and the book is read to them. Okay. And then in read to me, I may have this backwards. I haven't looked at it for a little while, and I'm not a regular user. But these are your essential choices. In read to me, the book is there, and then someone reads it to them, and that can be you, or it could be a family member. Just what I'm suggesting here is that if you don't have physical books, Epic is a way in, just like YouTube. One of the challenges with both Epic and with YouTube books is, frankly, if someone else is reading it, there's no guarantee they're doing a great job. All right, and I hate to be that way about it, but those of you who are skilled book readers, I'm sure that's everyone here. They have, not everybody knows how to do this stuff, right? So that's, but they are at least available. I don't have an answer for Jessica on limited Spanish books. Laura says that you can do some YouTube work of changing the language. I did not know that. So that might be something else to inquire into. Thanks for that help there on that, Laura. And Sarah mentions A to Z has books in Spanish and French. The gear icon is the key. Thank you, Laura. All right. So, yeah. Now, so access to books. If you have physical books, and we're gonna work today on the assumption that you have at least some access to physical books, and if you don't, then there will be some ways to get those books online. One of the questions that's come up has been copyright issues, and I'm not a lawyer. And obviously, if you get sued, don't say, well, Jonathan said. But I would share 2 things with you. I guess the starting point is we've had these questions. Can I take somebody's book that has a copyright page on the inside and share it online and not get sued? I want to tell you, first off, I'm not aware of that having happened to people. If anybody is, please share that. I'm also in the PowerPoint here, and then of course in the handouts, I have a link to a good issue on fair use. And I think what I would say on that is that I think the way to be safe is to share it with your class. If you decide you're going to start putting it up on YouTube and trying to get 50,000 hits and ads off of it, that might be another matter. But as long as you're sharing with your kids in your classroom, I have not seen that that's an issue. All right, so assuming you have access to books, where I want to spend really the rest of our time together is thinking about strategies for engaging kids in the story. Because you can be doing whatever, but if they're not engaged, that is motivated to pay attention, paying attention, thinking about the story, trying to make sense of it, trying to connect it to their experiences, on the edge of their seats even, hopefully, right? Then if that's not happening, then this is not powerful. On the other hand, when they are like that, we know that reading to kids is one of the most powerful things that we can do for building their language, for building their later reading comprehension, and for long-term success in school, right? So what I have here is sort of a menu of what I want to think about with you today based on what I have seen educators doing and what I'm hearing from educators and sort of what the field knows is effective. So book selection, things, which books we choose, the ways we prepare during books, the ways that we help kids understand the story, because if they don't understand it, they're not engaged. If they do and it's a good book, they generally are. The ways we read with expression, we know that matters. The ways we use visuals, especially the pages, the discussion questions, and then what we do at the end of the story. So that's where we're headed. So first thing is about book selection, and I want to note Karen, I believe, shared some handouts with you. Two of those are about book titles. One of them is a collection of titles that I've received as ideas from other educators. Another is a collection of ones that I've had success with online or watched educators have success with online. And I want to give you a few things that are probably the things that you think about anyway, but some of them have sort of particular resonance in the online environment. Okay, so we're going to think a little bit about comprehension difficulty, about the audience, like who we're reading to, right? About favorite books, predictable text, and illustrations. All right, so comprehension difficulty. Anybody here use a curriculum where they might recognize some of these books? Okay. These happen to all be titles from what I believe is the most widely used early childhood curriculum. Let's see. Creative curriculum. I think I'm guessing that's what some of you are recognizing. Okay. And one of the principles of creative curriculum, like some other, I think, really powerful curriculums, is that we read storybooks that are actually really challenging for children to comprehend. And some really good reasons for that, actually, okay? That when we sort of up the level of what we ask kids and scaffold that for them, then that really pushes their reading comprehension and builds their reading skills in ways that lead to later reading success, okay? So one of the complaints about creative curriculum oftentimes is, boy, these books are hard for kids, and that's on purpose, all right? And normally, normally in the face-to-face world, if we were doing a reading workshop, one of the things I would be doing is really pushing you to read really challenging storybooks and help kids comprehend them. In the online world, I'm suggesting we back off on that some, actually, and not read and at least be monitoring for whether we want to read books that are such a heavy lift for kids, and instead suggesting that perhaps we read books that have some characteristics that allow them to be easier to to comprehend. Yeah, Tracy, yeah, I think these are. I mean, these are all creative curriculum books. And if you're having success with them, awesome, go for it. If you're not, I want to recognize that online reading in some ways is harder, and so we may want to back off at least some on some of the comprehension challenges and engage in some other strategies that really help books, that help kids comprehend. So these are some titles that educators really report as being successful, okay? And one of the things that many of these books, I mean, these are probably all really familiar ones, right? And one of the things that many of these books have in common is a characteristic of being predictable. All right, that is, children have a relatively easy lift with some of these books because there are structures in the book that let the child kind of guess ahead of time what's going to be coming, and so they can get on there. It may be rhymes, it may be repeated phrases. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of this. All right, so this is a book that I'm assuming many of you do not know. The book's called Time for Bed. Okay, and there's this repeated phrase: "It's time for bed, little whatever, little whatever." Okay, and here's the page, and I've whited out one of the words. I'm guessing you're going to be able to figure out what it says. All right. It's time for bed, little sheep, little sheep. The whole wide world is going to. Anybody want to put in the chat box what they think that next word is? All right. We've got two ideas here, both of which, for comprehension purposes, would be fine: bed or sleep. Okay. And if you've read, and because, oh, everybody's going to bed, right? So that's an easy comprehension lift. Got it. Now, it so happens that this is a rhyming book. And if you'd read some other pages, you would have known that. So so sleep is actually what it says there. But in either case, you got where the author was going. And kids with some familiarity with language and rhyme, it's just an easier structure for them. So when Pete the cat has "oh no," right, and then whatever happened, right, and so those predictable phrases, "Cat in the Hat," those books, those Dr. Seuss books, those pattern books, those rhyming books are easier lifts for kids than many other titles. And so I want to commend them to your use. All right. I also want to encourage you to think about what the pages look like. All right. And this format of holding it, I don't know about what's happening in your world. If you've gotten Chromebooks and laptops out to everybody, fine. But if you still have kids, doing some of this on their phones, then really thinking about what kind of illustration size and detail you have. All right, and so this comes from, oh geez, The Little Red Hen makes a pizza, I think is the name of this book, if I remember right. And it doesn't take too much careful analysis of the illustration here to go, oh my goodness, that is one huge pizza, and that chicken is a little bit freaked out, right? And so it says it was lovely, but it was not little, right? And the illustrations are just so clear and clean on the page. That's not something I would always say in person readings. We can really pick apart details with kids, and we can notice their confusions and fix up their confusions. In this setting where that's harder, all of that is harder to do. Clarity of illustration is all the more important. We're going to have some more to say later about how children look at pages when they're on screens, because young kids actually do not necessarily look at that screen the same way you do, and that's going to sort of emphasize all the more important what kinds of illustrations. So a couple other comments here that I'd share. One is, using some of those favorites is, of course, a way to go. And for those of you that are doing curriculums where you have repeated read alouds, all the more valuable here. If your curriculum doesn't push for that, that is also a way of supporting engagement, is coming back to familiar books for kids. So having shared a few ideas about book selection, knowing that you have a couple lists of books, let me just take a moment here and invite you. And we're I think, Karen, we're just going to have folks do this in the chat box again, right? And invite you to share titles in the chat box that you have had success with online, or that you feel like fit some of the kinds of descriptions that we've talked about here. We have Brown Bear, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Yep, great. See some other folks typing here. Fairy tale unit. Oh, I don't, Christina, I don't know what fairy tales you've shared, but one of the characteristics of fairy tales oftentimes is there's some repeated kinds of events in those books. And those really help the structure. Elizabeth shares we're going on a bear hunt. Once again, there's a lot of repetition in there, repetition of the language, repetition of the structure. Oh, we encounter a problem. Can't go under it, can't go over it, right? Oh, we encounter another problem, can't go under it, can't go over it, we encounter another problem. And there's also a ton of drama in that, right? Goldilocks and the Three Bears, same kind of thing. We've got this pattern, this really consistent pattern. Through the Little Red Hen, once again, a pattern. Where is Green Sheep? Nicole, I don't know that book. I'm writing down that title. Let's see, one of the things I want to encourage you to do, and maybe Karen and I can talk some about how we can make sure we do this for folks, but because I forgot to do this, have this conversation, but we should save the titles in the chat for you. And if you want, you can copy and paste, and maybe Karen's putting something in the chat right now about it. Thank you. Green Eggs and Ham, same thing. David, once again, we've got patterns, Three Little Pigs, lots of patterns. Now, I want to be clear. If you are reading, that Charlie Anderson book or something like that, and kids are absolutely loving it and comprehending it, then you go, all right? But if you're finding, boy, online reading is in some ways more challenging than reading in person, I want to encourage you to back up to the level of book where you can be successful. Because what we know, of course, is that if kids are reading with us and they're successful and they're enjoying it, then the next time we get out a book, they're looking forward to that and they're more likely to be engaged. If, on the other hand, we're having repeated incidents of, wow, 5 or 6 kids are not engaged, then that becomes its own pattern. And when we get out a book, kids already start to disengage. So when we first start, and as we're trying to support this, I want to suggest the most important criteria is that the kids are interested in, staying with, understanding, enjoying that book. Okay, and if it's this long and if it's this easy, that's okay. Next time we can make it a little longer and we can make it a little more challenging, but they've got to be with us, right? Okay, Many Colored Days. All right, so we've got lots of suggestions there. Where is the Green Sheep? Okay, and Beverly, I don't know I Am So Brave either. So, all right, I've got a couple new titles here too. And then some others that aren't new to me, but are ones that I'm noting people have had success with. I haven't done Hop on Pop online. That sounds like fun. Great. Okay, so we got some titles to work with, and please, if others occur to you, please feel free to keep popping those up in the chat. Laura, nursery rhymes. Yeah, they can participate in those too, right? Or Laura Jackson too. Maybe that isn't Laura. Okay. In any case. All right. So now what I want to think with you about is you've got a book and you're thinking about how you want to present it. All right. And there are a number of different options. All right. And so what I want to do essentially is I'm going to walk you through sort of together with you a few of the different ways that we can do this. And for many of us, a starting point is what you see in this picture, or what I'm doing right here, right? Where you have a book. Oops, I'm going the wrong way, aren't you? You have a book, and you have your face, and you put the two of them in front of a camera, right? And I don't know, there's probably a technical term for this. I call it book and face side by side, which is a really clunky way to think about it. But Now there we are, right? So, and in fact, what do I need to do with this, right? Because there are all kinds of issues. They're going to see the whole thing, right? And so you've got all these kinds of challenges, and we'll need to think some about that. But, um, but I think for many of us, that's a starting point, right? We've got a book, we've got a camera, we've got a face. Hold them up there and do that. So I think let's at least start there. Let me ask, how many of you like read a book that way? Go ahead and put a Y if you've read a book by just sort of putting it next to your face. And yeah, lots of us have done that. Okay, terrific. All right, so you've had this experience. So what I want to do is I want to show you an example of someone doing that. I recorded an example of me just so we would have that. We're going to look at that. And essentially what I'd like you to do is to analyze it. What do you see that's effective? What do you see that's ineffective? I want to be clear. This is not like the perfect model. It's another educator like you who's doing it. And so let's use it as a chance to think together about what works. And, you know, just to sort of percolate in our brain some of the kinds of things we're looking for, of course. Book positioning matters, right? Where we put our face or our body matters. How we hold the book matters, right? Okay. The light matters. The background matters. There are probably some other things as well that you'll notice. So Karen is going to share a video with us. It's from the book Crocodile Beat, and it's an example of me reading. So we'll give you a little bit, and then we'll talk some about what you notice.
Crocodile sleeps and awaits his prey. Zzz, 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 zzz. It sounds like he's snoring, doesn't it? When I look closely right there at that eye, I think I see a little slit that's open. We'll have to see what happens with this crocodile. Ducks are quacking and splashing around. Quack, quack, quackity splash. Quack, quack, quackity splash. There's one that's splashing right there. Elephant's feet are thumping the ground. Boom, 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 boom. Oh my goodness. Monkeys screech and chatter away. Chitter, chatter, chitter, chatter, chitter, chatter. Eek. Chitter, chatter, chitter, chatter, chitter, chatter. Eek.
All right, there we go. You've got an example of a read where the educator is putting their face up by the book. So let's toss in the chat box some things that you thought you noticed that were effective or not, for that matter. All right. Oh, Penny says she couldn't see it. I assume that's because of something on your end, I hope. I'm seeing other people. I think you did. Okay. Sarah mentioned she saw half my face sometimes. The face bit's challenging, isn't it? How are you going to do that, right? The voice changes. Heidi, I'm assuming that was a positive. Tracy, you're saying it was fun to hear. I'm wondering what people found fun. Maybe the voice is some. The eye contact. Eye contact is tricky when you can't actually see someone, can you? You got to sort of stare into that camera. Heidi's noticing the pointing out the pictures. The lighting. Okay, Elizabeth. Yeah, thank you. The lighting was good, but you had issues with glare, and that's absolutely right. Okay. Physical response. My volume. Yep, volume was low. Okay. Especially there was that one point, especially the elephant. It got a little weird there, right? Okay. So Sarah says, do we want to keep our face in book in the screen at all times, or is it okay to just show the book? What do you think, folks? Do we need to have it like this all the time? Comments on that? Yeah, you're doing, what do we do? Okay. Or, oh, interesting comment there. Allowed enough wait time between pages. Jasmine says doing both. Okay. And Nicole says depends. All right. What you're, sort of what you're looking for. Okay. Tracy says they need to see the pictures, and I agree. I think it would be rare for me, or maybe even never, for me to just have my face. Okay, so I think that's probably that makes sense to me. Um, Whether I do this or this, show your face and the pictures. Okay, so I guess what I want to offer you on that, and I know it's hard for you to sort of put everything up in the chat, right? Is bottom line is if we want the illustrations to help hold the story, then the illustrations have to be seen, right? Okay. Um, at the same time, our face is also a cue for them, and so when we can do that, to go ahead and do that. I mean, ideally, if we can have both up there, we immediately see the problems though, right? And so I encourage you to think about, are there some places in this book where I absolutely want to make sure what they see is the illustration, all right? And at those moments, make sure I have that illustration up there, and maybe even be pointing to it. I also want to highlight that you folks cued in on a couple other things really big time. One is that in addition to the illustrations and our face, the other thing we have is our voice. And so how we use our voice really matters. Okay, um, and I also want to highlight all the sort of technical parts of this that you people really caught on to. Okay, one of them, for example, being the lighting. And I encourage you. I don't know what your format is, but it the process of of getting to see what it looks like for someone else. I mean, I didn't realize my lighting was what it was for that recording because I'd never recorded in that space before until I did it and put it up there. And I thought, then I thought, you know what? I'm going to leave it because then we can talk about it. Right now, I am, kind of in my Zoom space right now. And let's see. I'm going to show you with my camera here. I actually have this little, you can see it here. I've actually purchased a little light to put for shining on myself, and just, so, think doing what you can on the light. If you're not going to throw money at it, at least checking out how it works for your camera and such, and making sure all of that is effective. I do want to note that some of you are sort of commenting, there's some things about like how I held the book and the voice and all the rest of that. So no matter what the technology is, there are things that you can do that grab kids. You've always got the book to work with, your face to work with, and your voice. So, please use those tools. And then I guess my other take home on that is to have a chance to observe yourself or have someone else observe yourself so that you know how your lighting's working. One of the things, I don't know if anybody mentioned in the chat, but one of the things that I found when I went back and looked at that video was I found that like my background there was distracting. And at least for me, I've decided that's a space I'm not using anymore when I'm working with kids. So, figuring out what works for backgrounds matters as well. All right, so face-to-face technique, face and book technique. I think we've come to always have the book there. Use your face whenever possible. Your voice matters a lot. Really check out your technology. Consider your backgrounds. Anything else that we need to remember about there? All right. We're doing face by book. All right. Then let's go on to sort of the next way that I commonly see people doing story reads, and that's by presenting books, by having books sort of on the camera. All right. And so in these instances, You may not even have your face at all right? And the simplest way to do that is to simply hold the book up in front of a camera, right? Whatever your camera might be. Oops, I find this difficult to do. All right, but teachers do this. All right, so that's one way in. Um, there are a number of other ways in, but the essential here is you're really emphasizing putting the book in front, and that pops the illustrations, right? Um, there are challenges with that. I don't know if anybody. I imagine simply looking at this one that you're seeing right here, you can see that the biggest challenge with this one immediately is, boy, there's a glare problem on that one, right? So there are technology issues as well. And so we need to get into that some. Now, here's what the pros do. All right, this is from one of Dolly Parton's reads, and she's reading the book Little Engine That Could. All right, and I'm not Dolly Parton's technology person, right? But what you essentially see here is you see the book, and you see the book totally clean, right? And so how does that happen? All right. And like I say, I don't know Dolly Parton's process, but the way for any of us to do that is is to use a document camera. And I don't know if you have access to document cameras. I'm going to talk that through a little bit, and then talk about what to do if you don't have access to a document camera. All right. I have 4 examples right here. A document camera is essentially, it's a camera that just captures the image underneath it. Many of you may have one. If you're in a public school, when you're in-person teaching, they may have an Elmo or something like that. That's a version of a document camera, right? And these can, they do a great job of capturing the image. I've got mine right here. It's not hooked up at the moment, but I have that one that's in the middle there. Um, they can cost a whole lot of money, or they can be fairly inexpensive. But the essential thing is that they really allow you to just frame that illustration so that kids have a really crystal clear image of that. There are some challenges with them. In the handout that Karen forwarded to you, I think yesterday, she said, you will see in there some resources for choosing document cameras. If you don't have one and you're considering using one, so I've put together some tools for ways to choose those. I haven't looked for a while. I know a month or 2 ago they were still not that easy to purchase online because, of course, everybody's trying to use them now. But if you keep searching, you can find some. I would highlight a couple things if you're thinking about choosing one. One is some of them allow you to capture larger images than others. And this is particularly an issue because, let me grab a book here. The average children's book actually requires you, if you're going to show the whole 2-page spread, actually requires you to be able to capture a really large image. Okay, and there are any number of document cameras that will not let you do that. All right, and so pay attention to the size image that'll allow you to get. Okay, it's also really handy if it has an autofocus, because when you turn the page, you want that camera to set up exactly right on the next page. All right. And then think about what kind of connection it takes. And I won't get into all the logistics of that, but just make sure different ones connect in different ways. Make sure it'll hook up with your Chromebook or laptop or whatever you're using. Those are some of the essentials if you're looking at a document camera. I do find that they are one of the most effective ways. I can lay a book down in front of my document camera, and I can be reading with children and turning the pages and actually pointing to things with my hand. That's actually a big advantage with the document camera, is you don't have to try to go up here and get the little arrow and move the arrow around, but instead you can actually take your hand and put it right on an illustration. If you don't have access to a document camera, and if your school isn't going to spring for $100 for you or something like that, then phones do work. Okay, and there are a few things to know about that. Um, the the that stand that you see on the left there is a really cheap way of setting a tablet up as a document camera. You can get tripods to hold phones and so on. So that is another way in. All right. So if you're reading books like this in front of kids, great. If you're feeling like I really want to get those illustrations to pop, then some kind of document camera or phone or something like that can be another way to do that. The other way, or another way that I've really seen books pop by having somebody sort of put the whole page up there, is by actually scanning in the pages. And maybe some of you have done this. If any of you have comments on this, please share this. But you can actually like put a book into a PowerPoint or something by scanning all the pages and then dropping the illustrations into the PowerPoint. And so then you can fill your screen with that PowerPoint and you can narrate the book as you go along. That can be really effective. Any of you that know this particular book, or even just looking at that page, you can quickly see one of the challenges with that. Many books do not easily fit into a home printer or scanner. Once again, the size of a book is a big big challenge. All right. So one way around that is to use books that, while they may have a 2-page spread, actually, I've got this book right here. Okay. And the book may have a 2-page spread, but because of the way the pages work, you actually can just scan this one page, because everything on this page is, this is one episode. So you could scan this one page and put it up, and then scan this next page and put it up, so kids never see the 2-page spread and you don't have to worry about that. That works really well with focusing kids on what's happening too, and we'll see some of the challenges with that. Okay. It looks like we've got a couple ideas up here. So let's take a minute and look at those and share those. Nicole shares you can log in twice to a Google Meet, once with your doc cam and present the screen so it's up close, and then once with your separate device it will just show you. Great. Okay. Thank you. And Christina recorded a story from YouTube or other sites on mute, and then we record our voices over it. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. All right. Yeah, good ideas. Thank you. I had never thought of that, Christine, either, and I hadn't heard anybody else use that. Brilliant, as they say, right? Okay, this is why we all work together. One other thing about using, if you're scanning, is that you can scan individual pages and stitch them together, right? So you folks are probably mostly younger than me. You're probably much better at that than I am, right? Just coming back around, just a reminder to show your face whenever you can, right? For those of you using Zoom, it is, of course, is possible to put your if you've put the whole book into a PowerPoint, to put the PowerPoint up and then tuck your face into the corner, right? So just any number of apps let you do that. One of the things that the pros do that actually there's some good research on isn't necessarily a great idea is they go back and forth between this kind of setting you see here with Oprah, and then like a whole screenshot of the book. Okay, and it's actually hard for kids to make that transition. So I'd suggest you come up with something and stick with it rather than back and forth. Here's an example of how that works in Zoom, right? Of having both the book and the face up, and maybe some of you are doing this. In this instance, the teacher has the book up. She's actually scanned these pages in and is just going over them, sort of going through them page by page then in a PowerPoint. You could do the same thing by if take 2 cameras to do so otherwise. Here's what I want to show you about why we need to think about the clutter, all right? The clutter and the cuts. I want to suggest avoiding clutter and avoiding cuts. This is some research that that actually I was made aware of because of some discussion from the folks from Erickson Institute, who some of you may be connected with or, or be familiar with. They highlighted some research that shows what young children do when they're on screens and how they pay attention. All right. So let me walk you through this. All right. So here's an example. Here's what they were doing is they'd show kids various images. So here on a screen, all right. Um, to be honest, I don't know if it's a laptop or a Chromebook tablet. I don't know what, but they'd show kids an image in a virtual setting. Like here, they were seeing this image. The screen was filled with this number 3, and they were doing eye gaze tracking. All right. And here's what you can see. When they'd show that image to adults, guess what adults did? They looked at the number 3. All right. Guess what 4-year-olds did? It's a little more scattered, right? And look what 1-year-olds did. What we see is the younger kids are, the harder it is for them to know what to focus on in the screen. And when the image gets more complex, we see the same kinds of things happen. Right? We see it sort of happening even more. All right. In this second image here, we've got a number 9, and we have a child, and we have the count talking. And I'm sorry, we have a child, and we have the count, and the child is talking. So what do the adults do? They focus on the child. What do the 4-year-olds do? It's messier. All right. And what do the 1-year-olds do? Not pretty, right? And here we have, in this last one, for the number 10, we have the count and the child talking back and forth. And we see the adults are pretty good at going back and forth. The 4-year-olds, it's a whole lot messier. And the 1-year-olds, it's just kind of a hot mess, right? And what I want to highlight, where I'm trying to go with this, is to just let us know that when we are working with young kids, their attention, it's really hard for their attention to stay where it needs to be, all right? And the idea of cuts, like when you're cutting back and forth, kids don't necessarily follow the mirror. All right, so enough on the tech piece. Let's get into the reading itself. And I just want to remind you here that when we are interacting with kids in a book, that connection is still important, right? So saying, "Oh, I'm excited to read with you," share something about about your life with the child, notice something going on in their apartment, notice their hair. I think I'm going to pass on our poll in order to sort of save a little time here, but just to remember when we start the read, to start with a connect, to start with that move that we make that lets that child know we notice them, we want to be with them, we're excited to share this story, all right? So now let's think together some about how we plan the read and we do the read. And a lot of this is simply coming back to what we know are just effective storybook read techniques, all right? And here's the fundamental thing that I want to share with you is that when we read a good book in a way that kids understand and are emotionally engaged, they pay attention. They stay with it, okay? Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, that book was too long." What I want to suggest to you is that if they're engaged and understand, there's hardly no such thing as a book that's too long. All right, how long will they watch a Disney movie for? Oh, right, because Disney works on engagement. So thinking ahead of time about what we can do to really scaffold those children's understanding and engagement is absolutely essential. So let me just highlight a couple things that sort of put that in front of us. One of the things I have the opportunity to do is to see lots of storybook reads. And one of the things that, like if you have a chance to sort of step back and watch, you see repeatedly is kids not understanding stories, okay? So for example, I watched a teacher reading the book, The Paper Bag Princess, and there's that page where the dragon takes the princess and goes back to his cave, and along the way there's a trail of horse bones, okay? And what you're supposed to get from that is, wow, that dragon is kind of burning up everything and eating everything. And one of the children says, "You can't eat a bone, just dogs." And another child says, "Your throat wouldn't feel good if it has fire." They're not understanding what that story is doing here, which is supposed to be, wow, this dragon is really scary and nasty because it's eating everything and it's burning everything up. And that kind of thing happens all the time with little kids. They don't understand stories the same way we do. And so focusing on that story and creating a thread that we can sort of pull all the way through that story so that kids get what's going on in the book, all right? To really land that main idea, all right? And so, for example, actually, let me just give you this idea of a story thread, and that hopefully that illustration in the bottom, the illustrations on the bottom can make sense. Okay, there's a story from South Dakota in the 18. Well, actually, to back up, um, the the idea is this. I don't know if many of you probably live in the Chicago area. Those of you that live out on the in the prairies in Illinois, I expect you have the experience in a bad winter storm of getting what's called a whiteout. Here in Minnesota, we have that. Okay, so when there's a bad winter storm, the snow will come in and just be coming in so intensely and blowing so hard that you literally can't see across your yard. Okay, well, back in the old days, yeah, Sarah, living in central Illinois, you probably know this. This happens, right? Back in the old days, back 100 and some odd years ago, when farmers lived out on the prairies and they didn't have, they didn't have all the technology we have now, and they'd need to go out to the barn and feed their animals, even in the middle of a blizzard. The animals need food or they're going to die, right? So so something that would happen would be farmers would be a farmer would be walking from his or her house out to the barn, and there would be so much snow blowing so hard that they couldn't see their barn. And it happened that farmers actually got lost in the blizzard and died trying to make their way out to the barn. All right. So what they would do would be they would tie a rope from the barn to their house so that when that blizzard came and they needed to feed the animals, even though they couldn't see, they would step out their door and they'd follow that rope out to the barn. What I want to suggest you do is you create a rope that goes sort of along the main idea of this story, and you keep coming back to it and back to it and back to it so that when kids get lost, you and they can find your way back. Okay. In the Paper Bag Princess, the thread of that story is something like, oh my goodness, this scary, dangerous dragon has captured the prince. How will she get him back? I hope she doesn't get eaten. Something. And then we sort of take that all the way through. Oh, she's trying to trick the dragon. Take that all the way through so that we sort of land those key ideas. All right. So what we do before a story then is introduce the main characters, the story problem, stay with that. During the reading, we help kids understand that main idea by being very expressive and using think alouds. And after the reading, we ask some challenging questions. So what I want to do actually, let me just actually give a little description of this idea of think alouds. And the idea then is like during the story, we give some ideas about what we might be thinking that will help them understand the story. So if I'm reading the story, The Three Little Javelinas, which is kind of like the Three Little Pigs on Southwestern steroids, right? I might say, oh my goodness, here comes the coyote. I wonder if the coyote is going to try to eat the third little pig too, right? So we sort of do those things in our head that we would be going on in our head and make them visible to children. In addition, then, reading with expression, really making those voices, little pig, let me in, not right my chin, or whatever that might be, and really thinking of yourself as an actor. Because when you do that acting, it's not just entertaining for kids, it also gives them comprehension information. Because when you use that voice, you don't need to say that wolf or coyote is big and scary. They get it from the voice, right? And when you use a voice for the pig, like, not like that. Then we don't have to say, oh my goodness, that pig is scared. They're taking that all right from the story, right? So what I'd like to do is share a little bit of a read with you, and have you be able to um, just look at some of what goes on with that in order to in order for us to look at the kinds of things someone does that really support comprehension and support engagement, with this assumption that the fundamental thing that makes reads engaging for kids is that it's interesting and they understand it. So I'm going to take this book, Bunny Cakes, and I'm going to share an example of uh, of a read, and see what you notice that would sort of help kids comprehend that story and be engaged in it. All right. So actually, I think for our purposes here, I'm going to turn my camera off because this would not be um, a setup I would use on the technology. We'd have it up above like that. So we're going to assume I've sort of scanned this in and just use it or that I'm doing it with the dock camera, and I'll use a pointer as well, I think, as part of my technology. So we'll have that over here. Lots of different ways to do this, but that's how I'm going to do it for this one. All right. So, oops, why is it not letting me move with the pointer? Let's make sure. What do you know? Something I just learned new about these pointers is they can get stuck over on the side. Okay. I may not have access to that. Karen, is there a way for me to free it from the side here? Oh, right. I'm just not used to Adobe. My mistake. Thanks. All right. Okay. So I'm going to do a bit of a read and then invite some comments afterwards about what I've done that supports kids' engagement, especially about sort of comprehension and interest. Today, I have a new book for us. It's called Bunny Cakes. See this bunny right here? Yeah, that's Max. And Max wants to make a special cake for his grandmother's birthday. But when he goes to the store to get the ingredients, that's the things to make the cake, the person at the store, the grocer, can't read his note. So he wants to put red hot marshmallow squirters on the cake, but he doesn't get them. Let's find out what Max does so that he can make his special birthday cake for his grandma. It was Grandma's birthday. Max made her an earthworm birthday cake. Earthworm birthday cake? No, Max, said Max's sister Ruby. We're going to make Grandma an angel surprise cake with raspberry fluff icing. Oh, I think Ruby doesn't think an earthworm birthday cake is a good idea. She wants to make a different cake. Max wanted to help. Don't touch anything, Max, said Ruby. I wonder why Ruby won't let Max touch anything. I think I think kids like to help. I bet some of you like to help when someone's doing cooking too. Oh, but it was too late. Ruby sent Max to the store with a list that said eggs. I'm noticing the broken eggs. I guess Max did touch something, and now the eggs are on the floor. I'm thinking Ruby didn't want Max to help because he's a little bunny and still learning how to be careful. So, here, Ruby wrote eggs, and Ruby's telling Max to go to the store with this piece of paper that says eggs. So he'll buy some eggs for their cake because now she doesn't have any. Max broke them. Max wanted red hot marshmallow squirters for his earthworm cake. So he wrote red hot marshmallow squirters on the list. So here Ruby wrote eggs. Oh, and I see she used some letters, like that's a letter E. And Max did some writing down here. Where's Max's writing? Let's see what happens when he gives that list to the person at the grocery store. Oh, the grocer could not read Max's writing. Eggs, said the grocer, and he gave Max eggs. So he's giving Max some eggs, but no red hot marshmallow squirters. I guess, yeah, it says the grocer could not read Max's writing. So Max brought home the eggs to Ruby. Don't bump the table, Max, said Ruby. Uh-oh, it was too late. Oh, I'm seeing Max knocked over the milk and spilled it. Ruby sent Max back to the store with a list that said, milk. Oh no, now Max spilled that milk and Ruby wants him to go to the store to get some more, so here she wrote milk. This time Max wrote red hot marshmallow squirters in a different way. I wonder how he wrote it this time. We'll have to see. Max hoped and hoped for his squirters, but the grocer still couldn't read Max's writing. Milk, said the grocer, and he gave Max milk. Oh, I can see in the grocer's hand he has some milk for Max, but it looks like Max did green and red coloring on the list, and maybe that wasn't good enough for the grocer to be able to read it. It still didn't work. Max brought the milk home for Ruby. There's a yellow line on the floor, Max, said Ruby. You can't step over that line. Oh. Max broke the eggs, and he spilled the milk, and now Ruby won't even let him get near the table, so he can't help Ruby. And he still doesn't have the marshmallow squirters for his cake. Wonder how he's feeling about that. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to pause our story there and invite you to share some things that you noticed that I did that might help a child understand that story. We assume if they're understanding it, they're staying with it better and enjoy it. So what did I do either before or during the story that would help a child stay engaged and understand? What'd you notice? Tracy, I too like the Max. Pointing to the pictures in the list. So really trying to use those illustrations to help the child understand what's happening in the story. Okay. Christina noticed that I started with the main ideas and introduced characters prior to starting. Yep. For those of you that are using creative curriculum, that is standard practice in their books. And and I want to commend that. You know, when you set the stage for kids, then they get what's going on in the book. Okay. Involve them into the story. So Heidi mentions that I asked some questions throughout, so there's interaction. I did, we didn't. I don't have the option of taking you off of mute. We need to think some about questions and how to use those, right? Okay. Tracy mentioned the questions also, so we're going to do some thinking about those. Latoya highlights the voice changing. Hopefully there was some drama to that. And one of the things that keeps kids engaged is when there's a little bit of suspense. And the voice, Jasmine mentions that that's tied to the characters as well. Christina's highlighting adding my own thoughts and comments. Those are what I refer to as the think alouds as well. And Nicole highlighted the comments too. And the idea there is that oftentimes kids will not fully comprehend what's going on, and when we sort of share our ponderings along there, doing those kinds of things that sort of help kids understand the story by explaining things or wondering about things that might help them anticipate. So let's take a little bit of do some thinking about questions. On the one hand, okay, and then on the other hand, okay. So I think I want to talk about it in a way that's a little different from this slide. All right, we know that when we ask kids questions and give them an opportunity to talk, that they love to do it, right? And it does help them engage. And I don't know how you folks are using the mute button, but one of the things I certainly see people do is they'll ask, they'll be reading and then they'll take uh, one child off mute and ask them to comment, or they'll take the whole class off mute and ask them everybody to share, or they'll invite kids to share with their parents. Okay, and and there's some real power in that. All right, and so I think we want to acknowledge straight up that questions are a powerful engagement strategy. All right, there are some issues. All right, and I want to highlight one in particular, and that is that when kids answer questions in in ways that digress or that take kids off of so let me take digressions first. All right, so here we've got somebody making a birthday cake. Do you think kids have anything to say about birthdays? Absolutely, they do, right? And they can have lots to say about birthdays, and we can start talking about what their presents were, and we can start talking about who they're going to invite for their birthday, and what we know about that. Actually, this is a researched question that when kids start going down all those roads, then for the high skilled comprehenders, they can have a digression like that and come back. For the low skilled comprehenders, when we go down those roads, some of the kids never make it back. All right, and so I want to just caution you about sort of bird walks and confusing answers. All right, and instead suggest that when we ask questions, that we ask if the kids are going to answer during the story, we ask them questions that are going to be easy, relatively easy for them to answer, easily predictable ones, or simply having them comment to their parents, all right, and saving some of the higher order kinds of thinking questions for the end of the story, all right. Um, let's also think a little bit about the illustrations, and some of you mentioned the way the illustrations were used in that story. Um, this is something that can be done in lots of different formats. Those of you who have the advantage of long fingernails, this is your moment, right? Use those. Use your tools for pointing, right? Um, I also want to just highlight something that we have raised at other moments, and that is families. That oftentimes the families are there, and so something I couldn't do because of our format here, but that I'm guessing that some of you do, is you have kids turn in moments that we're in our classrooms that we might have done as turn-in talks. We can have them do as turn-in talks with their families. And so let me just take a moment and pause here and invite you, if you have comments on ways that you've used families and involved families in read alouds, then I'd encourage you to go take a moment and do that. Does anybody have something they want to share here about ways that you've involved families? And I've got one other comment on that too, but what have you done to bring families into some of the storybook reads in ways that you found effective? Got some folks typing here. Give you a second. Having parents read the stories too. If you can get the families to have access to that, absolutely. Yeah. That increases the kids' exposures to those books. And so if they can read that actual story, that's actually for those of you who are sort of trying to scaffold some kids that have a harder time engaging. If we were face to face, one of the things I would say, boys, if you have a child who has a hard time engaging, take that child to the book corner the day before, or 2 days before, or the morning of, or something like that, and give that child a one-on-one time with that story. And of course, you're not getting that moment, and so if families can do some of that, I also want to just mention. Oh gosh, now I can't even think of the technique. There are techniques for families to read books with kids where they don't actually have to do actual reading, and for families that have literacy challenges, um, they can, what, gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name of the strategy right now, but families can simply look at illustrations and talk about them with kids if they're not comfortable reading the words, and that can be a way to have them um, be involved and expose the kids to the basics structures of some of the stories. Laura, it is in effect a picture walk, but there's another name for it and actually, yeah, I'm going to let that go now. But there's it'll come right after this, I'm sure. Um, but I also want to highlight what Sarah says here of inviting kids to read together every night, even if it's not the same book, right? That we may have any number of kids with sort of limited exposure, and if we were in our face-to-face classroom, in our regular classroom, for that child that has a hard time staying engaged, I go over the book corner and plop that kid right on my lap, right? And we just can't do that in our virtual classrooms. And so getting kids that, warm association, really inviting the families to be involved. So I would invite you to sort of give parents different ways to read those books, even if they're not comfortable with the words. Um, and and also sort of unpack some of your techniques. If one of the things you do is do some talking about the book before you open it, then say to the parents before you read the book, parents, one of the things you'll notice is we're going to talk a little bit about who the characters are in this book before we actually read it. And or say to the parents, a way to have a book go better is when your kid goes to bed, you sit down and read it first so that you're comfortable with it the next day, or whatever those things are that we can give to parents as hints. Ooh, we are running out of time, and so I want to bring us to a few ideas to close. I've got just a couple other um, hints here that I've taken from other educators. I want to give you a moment. If there's something that you've done that's powerful in book reads that you haven't had a chance to share yet, if you want to put it in the chat room, I want to invite you to do that right now. I'm actually going to give you 3 prompts. Okay. One is this first one. If there's tips that you have not yet shared, this is your chance. Okay. I also, if there are questions that you've not yet had a chance to ask, I want to invite you to share those. And then finally, the most important part of any webinar is what happens tomorrow, right? So I want to give you a moment to just sit back and think for yourself about what we've done here. And if there's something from this work today that you want to make sure you use or be more intentional about using or use more of, I want to give you a moment to just process that for yourself, name it, write it down for yourself. If you want to stick it in the chat, go for it. All right? So, sort of 3 concluding messages, remaining tips, questions, and then what's your next step? What's your takeaway? Okay. Elizabeth's going to use more think alouds. Okay. Animal book. Ah, physical animal toy. Fun. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Um, being interactive, Tracy suggests. Being mindful of how the book looks on the screen. Previews I constantly get surprised by, oh, that's the way this looks for me? Okay. So I appreciate that. Take the time to see how your students are viewing you. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Make the books more engaging. Okay. All right. Discussing the pages first. For those of you who that sort of discussion of pages first, if that is something you want to do more um, work with, there is actually a really nice article I'm going to pop in the chat here on repeated interactive read alouds from Judy Schickadance and Leah McGee. Leah McGee is actually the person who put together the creative curriculum read alouds. And so they're sort of their thinking on their strategies for that, if that's useful for you. I still haven't thought of the name of that approach for parents to read, but I think of it, I'll let you know. I guess the last thing I want to share with you is a thank you, um, both for your ongoing work with children and for your engagement here today. I know I'm richer for having received all of your ideas, and I um, welcome continued conversation with you folks. There's my email. Please feel free to email me if you have other ideas to share or questions to um, 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 to to inquire about. I know I want to mention one other thing. I know the last thing that's going to happen is Karen's going to put send out a poll to you folks. I really encourage you to share that to answer those, because I take the responses very seriously. I want to make this a useful experience